True story, for the last 2 days, multiple conversations on this exact topic. Zone 2. I've seen this for a few years, and of course, my own biases aside, anytime somebody that I really don't enjoy listening to starts to use a term, I kind of turn off the term, so that's my own bias. That being said, what the hell is Zone 2? I obviously kind of have an idea on the type of intensity that this cardio is supposed to do. I do find some frustration in how is this calculated, because for instance, if you do 90 minutes of something, you can be in zone 1 and zone 2. And one of the questions that came across on Twitter was, is there a real big difference between this alleged zone 1 that's supposed to be 50 to 60% of your max heart rate and zone 2, which is 60 to 70? My response was, I don't know. It probably shouldn't matter. I don't know what these answers are, because when you put arbitrary parameters to A and B, but they are continuous in terms of their ordinal measures, what's the real big difference between, I don't know, 64% and 59%? Well, one is clearly zone 1 and one is clearly zone 2. But how do you get there also makes this very, very confounding. Where, for instance, if I do 10 kettlebell swings and I have every intention to rest whatever remainder of the minute, anywhere from 52 to perhaps 48 seconds, depending on how you're ripping them, if I get my heart rate up to 130, even 140 during reps 9 and 10, but then I rest and get my heart rate back down to maybe in my first couple sets as low as 90, am I in zone 1 when I explosively did kettlebells swings for 10 repetitions? This is so odd as to what motivates these different terminologies and these categories to help decide training. Well, if that is indeed an answer, I'm suggesting that there's zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, because it's an average, or is it not an average? No one knows. There's no standardization of this. If the problem is creating categories, I'm going to suggest that the solution be to categorize your training based on what it intends to develop. What are the adaptations that this particular training effort is meant to develop? So for instance, I don't know the answer between the difference between zone 1 for a long time and zone 2. What I do know is that when you're in these ranges, what I would expect, if it is a cyclic repeat, continuous nature, we will have an impact on the ability of the left ventricle to fill up more. So if you're going to be doing something for a very, very long time, you need the blood to flow to the extremities that are supporting this type of motion, supporting this type of continuous repetitive activity. I call it a cyclic repeat. Hopefully that doesn't confuse anyone. Cyclic repeat. You're doing the same thing over and over again. Like if you're on a bike, or if you're running, or you're rowing. And if you do something for a fairly long period of time, and you maintain your heart rate under a certain level, probably somewhere under 85%, somewhere, because everybody's a little bit different. Do you even know what your max heart rate is? Because sometimes 220 minus your age works, and sometimes it's not even close. But what are we getting is this ability for the ventricle, the cardiac muscle, the outside of the left ventricle, to be able to contract eccentrically. When you keep your heart rate under a certain level, like in this zone 1 and zone 2, but you still need a lot of blood, your only option is to fill up more. And what's very, very good and ideal for that is because you're keeping your heart rate low, because you're either fit or your intensity is not high enough. That's why I don't really care if it's zone 1 or zone 2. I just care, what is your relative intensity, and if it doesn't exceed an assumed certain level, you will fill with more blood. You'll fill the left ventricle with more blood, because you're not going to get another heart rate, another sinus rhythm, another boom within a period of time, so it has time to fill up. When you do things more intensely, now whether it could be a short period of time or just an all-out sprint, which you could do that for 2-3 minutes, your aerobic system will likely be the prime generator of energy, even if you're moving incredibly intensely, because it certainly also challenges, well, this is aerobic, this is anaerobic, this is this is this. It's very, very hard to use these linear words to describe all different intervals of the training process. So you could be doing something, and because you have an incredibly powerful aerobic system, you can maintain high intensities for minutes, like competitive rowers. This all becomes this real big mess. It becomes like, well, what is this? What is this? What is this? So again, if the question and the need is like, do we need categories for how we're training? Number one, I'd like to suggest that those categories should be like eccentric heart instead of zone 1 and 2. It tells me what I'm trying to do, and you don't have to worry if there's a difference between zone 1 and zone 2. Is your heart rate low enough for it to refill with a significant amount of blood? Your stroke volume is maximized. More importantly, you create the adaptation of the left ventricle into your next activity. We're talking slow, long duration activities of a relative intensity. Remember, slow is different for different people. An elite marathoner is running repetitive like 10 fours, hundreds. Like it's an unfathomable. But you're doing something for well over 2 hours in the elite marathon. My point is that it's all different for different people, and the relative intensities that you train at can only be individualized for that one person, because everyone is very, very different. If we can then continue to look at the cardiac adaptations, other than the ability of the left ventricle to load and have this eccentric quality of the muscle, you can also have concentric. That would be your very, very high heart rates. We've talked about other videos, so I do not think that weight training and resistance training for the purpose of having a muscular adaptation is the best opportunity to look at what the heart is doing. I will say it doesn't matter, because as you had high sympathetic loads, the heart rate will go up, but it has nothing to do with why you're training. You're training to create adaptations in the muscle, be it hypertrophy, strength, local endurance, peripheral types of measures. All of those things are sometimes completely separate from what happens to the heart. Sometimes they're companions, sometimes they're incidental. But now if we can start to look at things from an eccentric heart component or a concentric heart component, can we get better at both? Well, I don't think you can get better at both at the same time. Because as the heart rate increases and you have to punch harder to get more of an ejection fraction out of the left ventricle, you now will get another heartbeat very, very quickly, and you will not have the opportunity to develop this eccentric. So when you talk about going back to the original question, zone 1 and zone 2, can you get enough of a aerobic base, a foundation of fitness from zone 1, zone 2? I don't know the answer, but I do know we have to do it, and I think you have to do it. I don't know anything, and I do believe that if you can have those eccentric adaptations and then go into the concentric training of the heart, which ideally will be specific to your activity. If it's general population, probably doesn't matter what you do, but clearly how you generate that concentric contraction of the left ventricle. If it is sport specific, well then you're going to use times and activities that challenge what you do on game day. But they're still very, very different. The eccentric adaptations, or the adaptations of the diaphragm and all of the cardiac muscle, they may not look like your sport. All of these different, 3 different subcategories of how we can train an activity or a sport-specific heart is one of the 4 components that we're going to be delivering in the next version of T=R Elite Performer Program. There's 4 macro qualities. Again, every single time I talk about this, I will talk about where I learned it, because to me it's just very, very easy to give credit. This goes back to the founder of Omega Wave, what Val Nasedekin taught us many years ago when we were spending time in Finland, that the 4 qualities of every single high performer, every athlete, would have been high mass of endocrine glands, high proliferation of cytotoxic T cells, immune system, an activity or sport-specific heart, and high oxidative function of all type 1 and type 2 fibers. This whole zone 1 and zone 2 business would fall under the sport-specific or activity-specific heart. And the zone 1 and zone 2 would probably both be very, very similar to developing eccentric left ventricular qualities. If you have a left ventricle that can fill up with more blood because the muscle is springy and extensible, and I keep doing this with my hand to illustrate when the blood gets to the left ventricle, the outside of the left ventricle can be springy and parachutey and trampoline-like. More blood can get in because the next heartbeat isn't coming. That's why you can't do this if you're weight training, because of other reasons. And you don't want to do this. It doesn't matter if you're doing this in weight training, and you're certainly not going to do this in more high intense training that gives us other adaptations that also can be companion with peripheral. So there's a price to be paid in terms of this eccentric heart training, zone 1 and zone 2, where you're probably not going to be very, very specific to your terminal activity, but you're on the way. And that's what's very, very important on how to pick and choose from where the individual is starting at and where they need to get to. This is development of the human systems. It needs to be more precise if it's an athlete, less precise in general population, but the rules don't really change. And I think that's something that you're going to get across very, very well in T=R Elite Performer program. We're going to dig a lot deeper than what we just discussed here. But just relating it back to some of these questions on Twitter, I don't know what is type 1 and type 2. They're both going to probably have a nice impact of eccentric heart qualities. And to suggest that, well, we're not going to do anything slow, I used to say train slow, be slow. Wrong, because training slow is only just relative to the individual. And if you're somewhere zone 0, you're probably not doing anything. Zone 1 might just be walking outside. That has significant value. Does it have as much value as zone 2? Maybe zone 2 is just as an intended version of zone 1. My issue with these zones is that no one knows. You kind of have an idea, but if it means 2 different things to 2 different people, well, then we're challenged to communicate. At least if we talk about the adaptation of the heart. Now, if somebody disagrees that no, we do not need eccentric qualities of the heart. Okay, cool. Let's talk about football. But let's talk about something else. How about them Cowboys? My point is at least we at least know what we're talking about, and we can then discuss different positions on where this value lies. Because I would certainly take the argument that eccentric heart values are different across the board for different people, but at some point everybody needs it, because we also know that's the healthy heart. It is when the inside of the left ventricle becomes hypertrophy from concentric. It's this old message that actually has some merit from your big out of shape fat doctor who's telling you, well, you're doing too much lifting, you should do cardio. Well, unless you do an echo and actually measure the space of the left ventricle, you don't know that that's true. But now if you lift weights, but not for the purpose of these peripheral muscular adaptations, and you're just moving with external resistance to get your heart rate into the proper ranges, but you can still remain low enough to have this eccentric value, you're hitting a lot of boxes. There's a lot of good things that can happen there, because the heart rate is actually probably much higher than people think. You can get a lot of good things with extremely low heart rates. You could actually get a lot of good things with what feels like a very, very extended level of effort, because I don't know that most people even know anywhere close to what their real 100% is, whether they're going by what the toy tells them, whether they're going by what the 220 minus your age. Until you get on a bike and are motivated enough to go as far and as long as you can, and then you fall out, that's what your max heart rate is. Of course, there's more valid and reliable ways to test that, but until you do that, you don't know what your max heart rate is, because you'll be surprised, to use a line from Brett Jones, you'll be surprised what Aunt Betty can do sometimes. So that being said, you play around. I don't use these terms, zone 1 and zone 2. I think they're weak. I don't think they have any merit outside of this very weak and cheap way to categorize training so that you get some kind of feedback for what you did. How about the feedback come 6-7 weeks later when all of a sudden you don't need any rest, or all of a sudden sets 2, 3, and 4 are just as powerful and just as dominant as set 1. That happened from eccentric heart because you were able to fill up with blood, you were able to recover faster in between these very, very intense bouts. I'd rather that be your feedback rather than, oh, you did this many minutes in zone 1. I don't get it. I hope that if we can take a look at T equals R elite performer program, we'll talk more about the science and how the heart can change and how that can support the type of training that you want down the road, or at least at some points concurrently. Hope that all makes sense. Please check out below all the different things that we have coming up. And if this winds up being the webinar where if you're on the early sign-up list, you will be able to see the webinar, and we'll probably generate a lot of other topics just like this one to get you primed for what T equals R EPP is going to be all about.